Elena graduated from Scout Sniper School ranked second in her class of 5 survivors. The graduation ceremony was small and private. Families weren't invited, and there were no speeches or fanfare. Chief Thompson simply handed each graduate their certification and new assignment orders. "Congratulations," Thompson told Elena as he handed her the sealed envelope containing her next duty station. "You've earned the right to call yourself a sniper. But remember, this is where the real learning begins." Elena's assignment sent her to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, home of the 82nd Airborne Division and some of the military's most elite units. She was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, as the unit's designated marksman. For Elena, this meant transitioning from student to operational soldier, with real responsibilities for protecting her fellow paratroopers. The 505th was preparing for deployment to Afghanistan, where American forces were still engaged in combat operations against Taliban and Al-Qaeda forces. Elena would be part of a battalion tasked with conducting operations in the mountainous regions along the Pakistan border, some of the most dangerous and challenging terrain in the country. Her new squad leader, Staff Sergeant Tony Martinez, was a veteran of 3 previous deployments who had seen enough combat to be skeptical of untested soldiers. When Elena reported for duty, Martinez looked at her personnel file with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "So you're the sniper they assigned us," Martinez said, looking Elena up and down. "I've heard good things about your shooting. What I want to know is whether you can handle yourself when people start shooting back." Elena had been asked this question many times during training, but she understood that Martinez's concern was different. This wasn't about proving herself in exercises or competitions. In a few months, Elena would be responsible for protecting real soldiers in actual combat situations. The stakes couldn't be higher. "I understand your concerns, Staff Sergeant," Elena replied. "I know that being good at shooting targets doesn't automatically make someone effective in combat. All I can say is that I'm committed to doing everything possible to prepare myself and support the team." Martinez appreciated Elena's honest response. He had worked with soldiers who were either overconfident about their abilities or so nervous about combat that they became liabilities. Elena seemed to have a realistic understanding of the challenges ahead while maintaining confidence in her preparation. The 4 months before deployment were intensive. Elena participated in every training exercise and mission rehearsal, learning how her sniper skills fit into the broader tactical picture. She studied the terrain and weather conditions of eastern Afghanistan, memorizing maps and satellite imagery of areas where her unit would likely operate. Most importantly, Elena worked to build relationships with her fellow soldiers. As the unit's designated marksman, she would often operate somewhat independently from the main squad, but she needed to maintain communication and coordination with the infantrymen who would depend on her support. Private First Class Jake Morrison became Elena's primary spotter and closest partner. Morrison was 19 years old, from rural Texas, and had joined the Army straight out of high school. Like Elena, he was preparing for his first deployment, and the 2 rookies found themselves relying on each other for support and encouragement. "Are you nervous?" Morrison asked Elena one evening as they practiced range estimation exercises in preparation for deployment. Elena considered the question honestly. "Yes, but not about the shooting. I'm confident in my technical skills. I'm nervous about making good decisions under pressure, about reading situations correctly, about being the kind of partner and team member that people can depend on." Morrison nodded. He had been thinking about similar concerns. "My dad served in Iraq," he said. "He told me that being scared is normal and probably healthy." He said the soldiers who worried him were the ones who weren't scared enough to be careful. Elena found Morrison's perspective helpful. Throughout her training, she had focused on developing technical competence and physical capabilities. But the psychological aspects of combat were harder to prepare for. She couldn't practice making life and death decisions or dealing with the stress of knowing that mistakes would cost lives. The unit's pre-deployment training culminated in a 3-week exercise at the National Training Center in California. Elena and her squad participated in realistic combat scenarios designed to simulate the conditions they would face in Afghanistan. The exercise included live-fire training with close air support, artillery, and complex multi-day operations. During one particularly challenging scenario, Elena's squad was tasked with securing a village suspected of harboring insurgent fighters. Elena was positioned on a hilltop overlooking the area, providing overwatch and long-range support for the infantry soldiers searching buildings below. The scenario became complicated when role players acting as civilians began mixing with the soldiers, creating a situation where Elena had to identify legitimate threats while avoiding harm to non-combatants. Through her scope, Elena watched as the situation unfolded, tracking multiple individuals and trying to determine who posed actual dangers. When one of the role players suddenly produced a weapon and threatened Elena's squadmates, she had to make an instant decision about engagement. The target was moving among civilians, and a missed shot could have serious consequences. Elena took a deep breath, calculated the shot, and fired. The simulation round struck the target precisely, neutralizing the threat without endangering nearby civilians. But Elena found herself shaking slightly as the adrenaline subsided. Even though this was just an exercise, the stress of making split-second decisions with simulated lives at stake had been more intense than any training she had experienced. After the exercise, Martinez approached Elena for a debrief. "How did that feel?" he asked. "Intense," Elena replied honestly. "I knew it was just training, but when I was looking through the scope and had to decide whether to take the shot, it felt completely real." Martinez nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right response. If it had felt easy or routine, I would have been worried. The day this job starts feeling easy is the day you become dangerous to your own people." Elena's first deployment began with a flight to Bagram airfield in Afghanistan, followed by a helicopter transport to Forward Operating Base Chapman in eastern Afghanistan. The base was situated in a valley surrounded by mountains, with dust, heat, and the constant threat of enemy action defining daily life. Elena's first impression of Afghanistan was sensory overload. The landscape was more rugged and barren than anything she had seen in training. The heat was oppressive, and the dust seemed to penetrate everything despite efforts to keep equipment clean. But most striking was the constant awareness that this was a combat zone where people were actively trying to kill American soldiers. The 505th's area of operations included several villages and mountain passes along supply routes used by insurgent fighters. Elena's squad was responsible for conducting patrols, establishing temporary observation posts, and responding to intelligence reports about enemy activity. Elena's first patrol was a routine movement through a valley that had been relatively quiet for several weeks. The mission was to visit a village where local leaders had reported suspicious activity, gather information, and demonstrate American presence in the area. As the squad moved through the rocky terrain, Elena remained in communication with Morrison, who was serving as her spotter, and Martinez, who was leading the patrol. Elena's position was typically 200 to 400 meters from the main squad, providing overwatch from elevated positions that offered good visibility over the area of operations. The patrol proceeded without incident for the first 3 hours. Elena's squad visited the village, spoke with local leaders, and gathered information about recent events in the area. But as they began their return movement, Elena noticed something that made her uncomfortable. Through her scope, Elena observed 2 men on a distant ridgeline who appeared to be watching the American patrol. The men were too far away for her to see clearly without magnification, but their positioning and behavior suggested they might be conducting surveillance. Elena radioed her observation to Martinez. "Squad leader, this is Overwatch. I have 2 individuals on the northern ridge, approximately 1,200 meters from your position. They appear to be observing our movement." Martinez acknowledged the report and adjusted the patrol's route to maintain distance from the suspected observers. Elena continued tracking the 2 men, noting that they seemed to be following the squad's movement and possibly communicating with someone else. 20 minutes later, Elena's concerns proved justified. As the squad moved through a narrow section of the valley, Elena spotted the muzzle flash of an enemy rifle from a position about 800 meters away. Someone was shooting at her squad mates from a concealed position in the rocks. "Contact! Contact!" Elena radioed immediately. "Enemy fire from the east ridge, approximately 800 meters from your position." Elena could hear the crack of rifle rounds passing near her squad mates, and the the sound of return fire as the infantry soldiers sought cover and began engaging the enemy position. Through her scope, Elena tried to locate the source of enemy fire, but the shooter was well concealed and only exposing himself briefly to fire. This was Elena's first real combat situation, and she found herself experiencing a strange combination of intense focus and heightened awareness. All the training scenarios and exercises had prepared her technically, but nothing had prepared her for the knowledge that the bullets flying through the air were real, and that mistakes would result in actual deaths rather than failed grades. Elena forced herself to breathe steadily and systematically scan the enemy position through her scope. She was looking for any sign of movement or exposure that would give her a clear shot at the enemy fighter. After several minutes of patient observation, Elena spotted a brief exposure as the enemy shooter moved to a new firing position. The target was partially concealed behind rocks, with only a small portion of his upper body visible. The range was 847 meters according to Elena's laser rangefinder, and she could see heat shimmer rising from the valley floor that would affect bullet trajectory. Elena made quick calculations for wind, temperature, and elevation, then settled into her shooting position. Elena's first combat shot felt simultaneously routine and momentous. All her training and preparation had been leading to this moment, but when she actually squeezed the trigger, it felt like any other precision shot she had taken during practice. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, and through her scope, Elena watched the bullet strike its target. The enemy fire stopped immediately. Elena maintained observation on the area, watching for additional threats or signs of movement. After several minutes without further contact, Martinez ordered the squad to continue their movement back to base. That evening, Elena participated in a formal debrief of the day's events. The engagement had been relatively brief and straightforward, but it represented Elena's transition from training to actual combat operations. Martinez and other squad members praised Elena's performance, noting that her early warning about the surveillance team had helped the squad prepare for the subsequent attack. "How do you feel about today?" Martinez asked Elena privately after the debrief. Elena thought carefully about her response. "Relieved that everyone came home safe. Grateful that my training prepared me for what happened. And more aware than ever of how serious this job is." Martinez nodded. "That's exactly the right attitude. Today went well, but every situation will be different. The key is to stay humble, keep learning, and never forget that other people's lives depend on the decisions you make." Elena's first combat experience established her credibility with her squad and gave her confidence in her abilities under pressure. But she also understood that this had been a Scout sniper school began at 4:30 in the morning with a 12-mile run through the mountains of North Carolina. Elena had trained for months to prepare for the physical demands, but nothing could have prepared her for the psychological warfare that began on day one. Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Thompson, the head instructor, made his philosophy clear during the opening address. 60% of you will quit before the end of week 2. He announced to the 12 candidates standing at attention in the pre-dawn darkness. Another 20% will be eliminated for failing to meet standards. The remaining few who make it through will become part of the most elite shooting unit in the world. Thompson's eyes moved slowly across each candidate, lingering for a moment on Elena. This program will break you down and rebuild you. It will test every limit you think you have and then push you past them. If you're here for glory or because you think being a sniper is cool, leave now and save everyone time. Nobody moved, but Elena could feel the tension in the air. She had expected the training to be difficult, but the intensity of Thompson's delivery made it clear this would be unlike anything she had experienced. The first week focused on basic sniper skills, advanced marksmanship, range estimation, and camouflage techniques. Elena excelled in shooting exercises, consistently outperforming candidates who had years more military experience. But she struggled with other aspects of the training. During a stalking exercise designed to test candidates' ability to move undetected across open terrain, Elena found herself at a severe disadvantage. Her smaller size, which she had hoped would be an asset in hiding, became a liability when it came to carrying the heavy ghillie suit and equipment required for the exercise. While larger candidates could muscle through the physical demands, Elena had to rely on technique and efficiency. Instructor Staff Sergeant Kevin Walsh noticed Elena's struggles and decided to make an example of her. "Rodriguez," he called out during a particularly difficult stalking drill, "you're moving like a wounded elephant. If this were real combat, you'd be dead, and you'd have compromised your spotter's position too." Elena felt her face burn with embarrassment, but she forced herself to remain focused. She studied how the successful candidates moved, paying attention to their techniques rather than their strength. Gradually, she began to develop her own approach, using natural terrain features more effectively, choosing routes that minimized exposure rather than relying on speed. The breakthrough came during week 3, in an exercise called the unknown distance stalk. Candidates were given a target location and told to get within 300 meters without being detected by instructors equipped with binoculars and spotting scopes. Most candidates attempted to cover the distance as quickly as possible. Elena chose a different strategy. She spent the first hour of the exercise carefully studying the terrain through her scope, identifying not just the obvious cover, but also the subtle features that could provide concealment. Instead of taking the direct route, she planned a circuitous path that would take longer but offer better protection from observation. The exercise was designed to take 4 hours. Elena completed it in 3.5 hours, and the instructors never spotted her. When she emerged at the designated endpoint, Walsh was waiting with a surprised expression. "How did you get here?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. Elena pointed to a series of small depressions and ridges that most people would have overlooked. "I went around the obvious routes and used microterrain features for concealment," she explained. "It took longer, but I never had to expose myself to direct observation." Walsh studied Elena with new respect. "That's advanced thinking for someone your experience level. Where did you learn that technique?" "I didn't learn it," Elena replied. "I figured it out by watching what worked and what didn't." This ability to analyze and adapt became Elena's signature strength throughout the rest of sniper school. While other candidates relied on prescribed techniques and standard procedures, Elena developed innovative approaches to complex problems. Her small size, which had initially seemed like a disadvantage, became an asset as she learned to use concealment and positioning rather than strength and speed. The academic portion of sniper training proved equally challenging. Students were required to master complex mathematical calculations for long-distance shooting, including factors like bullet trajectory, wind drift, atmospheric pressure, and target movement. Elena's methodical approach to learning served her well here. While other candidates struggled to memorize formulas, Elena focused on understanding the underlying principles. During a night class on ballistics calculations, Elena asked a question that stumped even the instructors. "Why do we use these specific formulas for wind calculation when the mathematical models suggest there should be additional variables for air density at extreme ranges?" Chief Thompson, who was teaching the class, paused for a long moment. "That's a question that gets asked at the advanced courses," he said. "The short answer is that for most tactical situations, the simplified calculations are sufficient. But you're right. There are additional factors that become important at extreme ranges." After class, Thompson approached Elena privately. "Have you been studying ballistics on your own time?" Elena nodded. "I ordered some textbooks and have been working through the math. I wanted to understand the theory behind what we're learning." Thompson was impressed. Most students were content to learn the practical applications without delving into the underlying science. Elena's curiosity suggested a level of intellectual engagement that went beyond simple compliance with training requirements. "Keep that up," Thompson advised. "The students who understand the why behind the how are the ones who become truly exceptional operators." The halfway point of sniper school brought the most challenging phase: live-fire exercises under simulated combat conditions. Students were required to engage targets at distances ranging from 300 to 1,200 meters while dealing with time pressure, stress, and realistic distractions. Elena's first major test came during an exercise called multiple target engagement. Students were given a scenario involving several enemy combatants threatening friendly forces, with targets positioned at different ranges and requiring different levels of priority. The exercise was designed to test both shooting accuracy and tactical decision-making under pressure. As Elena studied the target array through her scope, she noticed something the instructors might not have intended. The positioning of the targets created an opportunity for a non-standard engagement sequence that would neutralize the highest priority threats more quickly than the suggested approach. Instead of engaging targets from closest to farthest, as most students would do, Elena identified a shooting position that would allow her to eliminate the most dangerous targets first, even though they were at greater distances. The approach required more difficult shots initially, but it would prevent the simulated enemies from threatening friendly forces. Elena's spotter for the exercise was Private First Class David Chun, a fellow student who had been skeptical of her abilities. "Are you sure about this approach?" he whispered as Elena explained her plan. "The instructors are expecting us to follow standard engagement protocols." "Standard protocols assume standard situations," Elena replied calmly. "This situation gives us an opportunity to be more effective." When the exercise began, Elena's unconventional approach initially confused the instructors monitoring the drill. Instead of taking the obvious first shot, Elena engaged a target at 800 meters that appeared to be a secondary priority. Her second shot eliminated another distant target. Only then did she engage the closer, more obvious threats. The result was a scenario completion time that was 30% faster than the expected standard, with all targets neutralized before any could theoretically engage friendly forces. When Elena and Chun reported to the debriefing station, the instructors were examining their records with puzzled expressions. "Explain your engagement sequence," Chief Thompson requested. Elena walked through her tactical reasoning, using a terrain model to demonstrate how her approach had created a more effective solution to the problem. As she spoke, Thompson's expression shifted from confusion to genuine interest. "That's not what we taught you," he observed. "No, sir," Elena agreed. "But it's what the situation required." Thompson exchanged glances with the other instructors. "Rodriguez, what made you think you could deviate from established procedures?" Elena considered her answer carefully. She didn't want to sound arrogant or disrespectful, but she also wanted to be honest about her thinking process. "Sir, I understand that procedures exist for good reasons, and I'm not suggesting they're wrong. But in this specific scenario, the terrain and target placement created an opportunity for a more effective approach. I thought my job was to complete the mission as effectively as possible." The debriefing room was quiet for several seconds. Finally, Thompson nodded slowly. "You're right. Your job is to complete the mission effectively. The fact that you saw an opportunity that the rest of us missed is exactly the kind of thinking we want to develop in our students." Word of Elena's innovative approach spread quickly among the instructors and students. Some of her fellow candidates began to see her as a threat to their own success. Others recognized her abilities and sought to learn from her techniques. Elena found herself in the unusual position of being both respected and resented by her peers. The social dynamics became more complicated as the class size dwindled. By week 8, only 7 of the original 12 candidates remained. The survivors had formed tight bonds through shared hardship, but Elena often felt like an outsider. Her success in exercises that challenged others created tension, and her methodical approach to learning made some candidates feel inadequate. The situation came to a head during a field exercise in week 10. Students were paired for a 48-hour mission that required them to establish a hidden observation post and maintain surveillance on a target area. Elena was partnered with Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a veteran with 6 years of military experience who had initially been confident about his chances of completing the program. Rodriguez had struggled with the academic aspects of sniper training and was barely maintaining the minimum scores required to continue. Being partnered with Elena, who consistently scored at the top of the class, bruised his ego and made him resentful. "Just because you can shoot doesn't mean you know how to operate in the field," Rodriguez told Elena as they prepared their equipment for the exercise. "This isn't a shooting competition anymore. This is about survival and mission completion." Elena didn't respond to the provocation, but she could feel the tension building. She focused on her equipment checks and mission planning, determined not to let personality conflicts interfere with the training. The exercise began with a night insertion into a wooded area followed by a 6-mile movement to the target location. Elena and Rodriguez had to carry all their equipment, establish a concealed observation post, and maintain surveillance for 2 days while avoiding detection by instructor teams playing the role of enemy forces. The first 12 hours went smoothly. Elena's navigation skills proved excellent, and they reached their assigned area ahead of schedule. But when they began establishing their observation post, Rodriguez's resentment boiled over. "Stop telling me how to do my job," he snapped when Elena suggested a modification to their camouflage setup. "I was operating in Afghanistan when you were still in high school." Elena tried to defuse the situation. "I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm just sharing what I think might work better." "What you think?" Rodriguez's voice was rising dangerously. "You think too much. Sometimes you need to trust experience over textbook theories." The argument might have escalated further, but Elena made a decision that surprised both of them. Instead of defending her position or arguing back, she simply said, "You're right. You have more field experience than I do. How do you think we should proceed?" Rodriguez was taken aback by Elena's response. He had expected her to fight back or assert her academic superiority. Instead, she was genuinely asking for his input and acknowledging his experience. Over the next 2 days, Elena and Rodriguez developed an effective working partnership. Elena's analytical skills complemented Rodriguez's practical experience, and they completed the exercise successfully. More importantly, Rodriguez gained respect for Elena's character and professionalism. "I misjudged you," Rodriguez told Elena as they packed their equipment at the end of the exercise. "I thought you were just a smart-ass who thought she knew everything. But you're willing to listen and learn, and that's more important than being right all the time." Elena appreciated the acknowledgement, but she was more focused on the lessons she had learned about leadership and teamwork. Excellence in technical skills wasn't enough if you couldn't work effectively with others. The best snipers would need to be not just expert marksmen, but also effective team members and leaders. The final weeks of sniper school brought the ultimate challenge, a comprehensive exercise that tested everything students had learned. Elena would need to demonstrate not just shooting skills, but also fieldcraft, mission planning, and the ability to operate independently under extreme pressure. As she prepared for the final test, Elena reflected on how much she had changed since arriving at the school. She was no longer the uncertain recruit who had worried about measuring up to more experienced soldiers. She had developed confidence in her abilities while learning to value the contributions of others. Most importantly, she had learned that being exceptional wasn't about being perfect. It was about constantly pushing yourself to grow and improve. The final exercise would determine whether Elena graduated from one of the military's most demanding programs. But, regardless of the outcome, she already knew she had become the soldier she had always aspired to be. Elena Rodriguez never planned to become a sniper. Growing up in a small farming town in Montana, she spent her childhood helping her grandfather repair tractors and chase cattle across endless fields. Her hands were always covered in engine grease or dirt, and she preferred the company of horses to people. But there was one thing that set Elena apart from other kids in her town: she could shoot. Her grandfather, Miguel Rodriguez, had served in Vietnam as a Marine marksman. Every Sunday after church, he would take Elena to the old quarry outside town with his weathered hunting rifle. While other 8-year-olds were playing video games, Elena was learning to read wind patterns and calculate bullet drop over distance. Miguel never pushed her, but he noticed something special in the way she approached shooting. She didn't just pull the trigger, she became one with the rifle. Elena's mother worried about her daughter's unusual hobby. Sarah Rodriguez had moved to Montana to escape the violence of her childhood in Detroit, and seeing her daughter with weapons made her nervous. But Miguel understood something his daughter-in-law didn't. Elena wasn't drawn to guns because she was violent. She was drawn to them because she was precise. In a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable, shooting gave Elena control. When she lined up a shot, everything else disappeared. There was only the target, the wind, and her breathing. By the time Elena turned 16, she was out shooting grown men at the local shooting competitions. The old-timers who had been winning prizes for decades found themselves beaten by a teenager who approached shooting like a science experiment. She kept detailed notebooks about wind conditions, temperature, humidity, and how each variable affected her shots. Other shooters relied on instinct and experience. Elena relied on data and discipline. When Elena graduated high school, she faced a choice that would define her life. Her grades were good enough for college, and her mother desperately wanted her to pursue a degree in engineering or medicine, anything that would take her far away from guns and violence. But Elena felt pulled in a different direction. The local Army recruiter, Sergeant First Class James Morton, had been watching her shooting competitions for 2 years. He saw potential that went beyond weekend tournaments. The conversation that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in March. Elena was working late at her part-time job at the hardware store when Sergeant Morton walked in, ostensibly to buy some bolts for a home project. But instead of heading to the hardware section, he approached the counter where Elena was balancing the day's receipts. "I've been watching you shoot," Morton said without preamble. Elena looked up, surprised. She recognized him from around town, but had never spoken to him directly. "Good or bad watching?" she asked, her natural defensive instincts kicking in. Morton smiled. "The kind of watching that makes me think you're wasting your talent shooting at paper targets and tin cans." He leaned against the counter, his expression growing serious. "Have you ever thought about what you could do with that gift of yours? Really do with it?" Elena had been asked this question before, usually by people who assumed she wanted to become a police officer or a hunting guide. But something in Morton's tone suggested he had a different kind of future in mind. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "The Army has a program," Morton explained. "Special training for people with exceptional marksmanship skills. It's not for everyone. It's demanding, both physically and mentally. But for the right person, someone with your natural ability and discipline, it could be the chance to serve your country in a way that really matters." Elena's first instinct was to say no. She had heard enough military recruiting pitches to know they were usually heavy on promises and light on reality. But as Morton continued talking, describing the precision and skill required for military marksmanship, something stirred in her chest. This wasn't about playing soldier or following orders blindly. This was about taking her natural abilities and pushing them to levels she had never imagined possible. The decision wasn't easy. Elena's mother cried for 3 days when she announced her intention to enlist. Her grandfather, surprisingly, supported her choice. "The military will teach her things I never could," Miguel told his daughter-in-law. "And if there's ever trouble in this world, I want Elena on our side." Elena enlisted on her 18th birthday, shipping out to basic training at Fort Benning just 2 weeks after graduation. The transition from small-town Montana to military life was jarring. The noise, the constant activity, the pressure to conform. Everything about Army life seemed designed to overwhelm new recruits. But Elena adapted by doing what she had always done. She observed, learned, and excelled through quiet determination rather than loud bravado. Basic training revealed Elena's first real challenge. While she could outshoot anyone in her unit, she struggled with the physical demands of military life. At 5 feet 4 inches and 125 pounds, she was smaller than most of her fellow recruits. The obstacle courses that others completed with relative ease left Elena exhausted and struggling. Her drill instructors questioned whether someone her size could handle the demands of infantry training. Staff Sergeant Williams, Elena's primary drill instructor, was particularly skeptical. A 20-year veteran who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, Williams believed that combat was fundamentally about physical strength and aggression. He saw Elena as a liability waiting to happen, someone who might get herself and others killed when things got serious. "Rodriguez," Williams said after Elena struggled through a particularly difficult combat exercise, "you might be able to hit a target at the range, but this isn't about target shooting. This is about life and death, and I'm not convinced you have what it takes." Elena's response surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of getting defensive or angry, she simply said, "Give me a chance to prove you wrong, Staff Sergeant." That chance came during advanced marksmanship training. While other recruits were learning basic shooting skills, Elena was demonstrating capabilities that made her instructors take notice. She consistently scored perfect marks at distances that challenged experienced shooters. More importantly, she remained calm and focused under pressure situations designed to simulate combat stress. The turning point came during a field exercise designed to test recruits' ability to perform under extreme pressure. Elena's unit was tasked with defending a mock village from simulated enemy attacks. While other soldiers focused on laying down suppressive fire, Elena positioned herself on a rooftop with her rifle and began systematically eliminating threats with single, precise shots. Captain Jennifer Hayes, the officer overseeing the exercise, watched Elena work through binoculars. What impressed Hayes wasn't just Elena's accuracy, it was her composure. While chaos erupted around her, Elena moved with deliberate calm, taking each shot with the same methodical precision she had learned at the quarry with her grandfather. After the exercise, Hayes approached Elena privately. "Have you ever heard of the Scout Sniper program?" she asked. Elena shook her head. She was familiar with snipers from movies and books, but she had never considered it as a realistic career path. "It's one of the most demanding training programs in the military," Hayes explained. "Most people who attempt it fail. But for those who succeed, it opens doors to specialized units and missions that make a real difference. I think you should consider applying." The application process for Scout Sniper School was grueling. Beyond demonstrating exceptional marksmanship skills, candidates had to pass psychological evaluations, physical fitness tests, and extensive background checks. Many applicants were eliminated before they ever reached the actual training. Elena's application sparked debate among the selection committee. Her shooting scores were undeniably impressive, but concerns remained about her size and whether she could handle the physical demands of sniper operations. Several committee members argued that sniper training was too important to risk on someone who might not be able to carry the heavy equipment required for long-distance missions. Colonel Robert Chun, the officer in charge of the selection process, had the final say. A veteran of multiple combat deployments, Chun had seen enough combat to know that success in war often came down to factors that couldn't be measured in a gymnasium or on a standardized test. "I've read her file," Chun told the committee. "Her shooting scores speak for themselves. But what interests me more is her psychological profile. Every instructor who has worked with her mentions the same thing. She doesn't crack under pressure. She gets calmer, not more stressed, when things get difficult. That's not something you can teach." Elena received her acceptance letter 3 weeks later. She was one of only 12 candidates selected for the next Scout Sniper class, and the only woman. The letter included a warning that the training would be the most challenging thing she had ever attempted, with a failure rate exceeding 70%. Elena read the letter 3 times, then called her grandfather. "I got in," she told him simply. Miguel Rodriguez had been waiting for this call. "I know you did, Mija. The question is, are you ready for what comes next?" Elena looked out the window of her barracks at the other soldiers going about their daily routines. Most of them were content with regular military service, following orders, serving their time, and going home. But Elena felt called to something more demanding, more specialized. She thought about all the Sunday afternoons at the quarry, all the hours spent studying wind patterns and practicing breathing techniques. Everything had been leading to this moment. "I'm ready," she told her grandfather. And for the first time since enlisting, Elena truly believed she was. The radio crackled with desperate voices. 3 days into the siege, hope was fading fast. 67 hostages trapped inside the compound, their captors growing more unstable by the hour. The negotiators had failed. The assault teams were pinned down. And now, with darkness falling and threats of executions echoing through the speakers, everything came down to one person nobody believed in. She was 24 years old, standing barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, holding a rifle that weighed almost as much as she did. The target was 3,547 meters away, nearly 2.25 miles through swirling wind, across terrain that had already defeated 3 of the military's best marksmen. The margin for error? 0. Miss, and innocent people die. The pressure would have crushed most trained soldiers. But Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez wasn't most soldiers. What happened next would rewrite the tactical manuals, challenge every assumption about human capability under pressure, and prove that sometimes the person everyone doubts becomes the one who saves the day. This is the true story of the shot that seemed impossible, taken by a woman who refused to accept that word existed.